Have you ever heard of a war that lasted for just one person? Not a war in their mind, but a real, physical conflict they fought alone, for almost 30 years after everyone else had gone home. It sounds like something out of a movie, but this is the true story of a Japanese soldier named Hiroo Onoda. His personal war didn't end in 1945, it ended in 1974. How could this happen? How could one man miss the end of the biggest war in human history and continue fighting in the jungle for 3 decades? Let's dive into one of the most incredible stories of survival, duty, and delusion ever told. Our story begins in December 1944. World War II is raging across the Pacific. 22-year-old Hiroo Onoda, a trained intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army, is sent on a secret mission. His destination is a small, remote island in the Philippines called Lubang. His orders were crystal clear and would echo in his mind for the next 30 years. He was to conduct guerrilla warfare, disrupt enemy operations, and destroy the airfield and pier. And crucially, he was told to never surrender. He was ordered to hold the island until the Imperial Army returned. Under no circumstances was he to give up his life voluntarily. When Onoda arrived on Lubang, the situation was already grim. American forces were closing in. The other Japanese soldiers on the island were either preparing to retreat or surrender. Onoda tried to convince his commanding officers to follow his orders and fight back from the mountains, but they dismissed him. Soon enough, American forces landed and quickly took control of the island. Most of the Japanese soldiers were either killed or captured. Onoda, however, along with 3 other soldiers, managed to escape into the dense and forgiving jungle. Their names were Private Yuichi Ikatsu, Corporal Shiichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka. For these 4 men, the war was just beginning. They established a base deep in the mountains, surviving on what they could find, mostly bananas, coconuts, and occasionally, stolen cattle from local farms. They believed the fight for Japan was still ongoing. Their mission was to gather intelligence and sabotage the enemy, who they now considered to be the local islanders and the Philippine police. For them, every person on Lubang who wasn't Japanese was a potential threat. They lived in a constant state of high alert, their world shrinking to the dense foliage, the sounds of the jungle, and the bond they shared as soldiers. In August 1945, the war officially ended. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered. The world began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. But on the island of Lubang, this news never reached Onoda and his men in a way they would believe. Leaflets were dropped from planes announcing the end of the war. They found them, read them, but dismissed them as clever enemy propaganda. Why would their emperor, a divine figure, ever surrender? It was unthinkable. They concluded it was a trick to lure them out of hiding. So they stayed. Newspapers and letters from their families were also dropped into the jungle. Again, they studied them meticulously, looking for hidden codes and secret messages. They found what they were looking for, or rather, what they wanted to find. A slight change in phrasing, a line that seemed out of place. It was all part of the enemy's complex deception. Their training as intelligence officers worked against them. They were programmed to be suspicious, to see traps everywhere. The outside world was trying to tell them the truth, but their reality was shaped by their mission and their unwavering loyalty. As the years passed, life in the jungle became a grueling routine. They maintained their rifles with painstaking care, patching their worn-out uniforms with whatever fabric they could find. They clashed frequently with local villagers and police patrols. These weren't grand battles, but desperate, deadly skirmishes. From the perspective of the islanders, these weren't soldiers fighting a war. They were dangerous holdouts, bandits who stole their food and posed a constant threat to their safety. Over the course of 30 years, Onoda's group was responsible for the deaths of around 30 local people. The first crack in their small unit appeared in 1949. Private Ikatsu, after 5 years in the jungle, had had enough. He separated from the others and, after 6 months alone, finally surrendered to the Philippine military in 1950. For Onoda, Shimada, and Kazuka, This was a security breach, but it didn't shake their resolve. They believed Akatsu had deserted. They became even more cautious, retreating deeper into the mountains. Akatsu's surrender, however, confirmed to the outside world that there were still Japanese soldiers hiding on Lubang. Search parties were organized, more leaflets were dropped, but Onoda and his men remained hidden, convinced it was all a trap prompted by Akatsu's capture. 4 years later, in May 1954, tragedy struck. Corporal Shimada was shot and killed during a clash with a search party of local police. Now, only two remained, Onoda and Kazuka. For the next 18 years, these two men would be each other's only companions, a brotherhood forged in isolation and a shared, distorted reality. They continued their mission, monitoring the enemy's activities, which included observing the construction of roads and the daily lives of the villagers. They celebrated New Year's Day, saluted the Japanese flag they had made, and sang the national anthem, keeping the spirit of the Imperial Army alive in their lonely jungle outpost. The world outside changed dramatically. Japan transformed from a defeated empire into a global economic powerhouse. The Cold War came and went. Men walked on the moon. But for Onoda and Kazuka, time stood still. Their war was the only reality they knew. Then, in October 1972, their two-man army was cut in half. While on one of their routine raids to burn rice collected by farmers, they were ambushed by a local police patrol. Kazuka was shot and killed. He had fought for 27 years after the war had ended. Onoda was now completely alone. The death of Kazuka caused a sensation back in Japan. It was proof that at least one more soldier might still be alive on Lubang. The Japanese government organized a new, large-scale search party, but they found nothing. Onoda, now more paranoid than ever, was a master of evasion. He was a ghost in the jungle. The man who would finally end Hiroo Onoda's war was not a soldier or a diplomat, but a young Japanese university dropout and adventurer named Norio Suzuki. Suzuki had a quirky life goal. He wanted to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. In 1974, he traveled to Lubang Island with that exact intention. Against all advice, he ventured into the jungle alone, calling out Onoda's name and telling him the war was over. Amazingly, after just 4 days, he found him. Onoda, wary and armed, was observing Suzuki from a hidden position. He had planned to shoot him, but something about the young man's demeanor made him hesitate. Suzuki was a hippie, as Onoda later described him, and he didn't seem like a threat. Suzuki approached him calmly, and they began to talk. Onoda explained that he would not surrender unless he received a formal order from his commanding officer. He was still bound by the orders given to him 30 years ago. Suzuki returned to Japan with this incredible story and a photograph of himself with Onoda as proof. He had found his man. The Japanese government scrambled to locate Onoda's former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who was now an old man working in a bookstore. They flew him to Lubang. On March 9, 1974, in a clearing in the jungle, a scene from another era played out. Major Taniguchi, wearing his old uniform, formally read the orders of surrender to Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. With tears in his eyes, Onoda accepted. His 30-year war was finally over. He turned over his service rifle, which was still in perfect working order, his ammunition, and his samurai sword. He emerged from the jungle, thin and weathered, but in surprisingly good health. He was 52 years old, and he had spent more than half his life fighting a war that didn't exist. His return to Japan was a media frenzy. He was hailed by some as a hero, a symbol of pre-war duty and loyalty. To others, he was a tragic figure, a man robbed of his life by an outdated code of honor. Onoda himself struggled to adapt to modern Japan. The world had changed in ways he couldn't comprehend. The values he had fought and nearly died for seemed to have vanished. He eventually moved to Brazil to run a cattle ranch, finding peace in the wide open spaces. He later returned to Japan to run nature camps for children, teaching them the survival skills he had mastered. Hiroo Onoda passed away in 2014 at the age of 91. His story remains one of the most powerful testaments to the human capacity for endurance, loyalty, and the profound power of belief. It is a story that forces us to ask ourselves, what do we believe in so strongly that we would sacrifice everything for it? And what happens when that belief is no longer true? It's a haunting tale from our history that feels more like a legend. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories from history. See you next time.